guess I'm in a high pressure position here, the last presenter of the day. There's food in there, and I once heard an old preacher who said, in situations like this, there are three things to keep in mind. You want to talk about sin, talk about salvation, and talk about 5 minutes. So that's what I'm going to try to do today. So as you can see, I'm going to talk about the political ecology of soil today using the example of the 1971 Charleston County Soil Survey. This is a small thread from my dissertation, which is about race and agricultural change in the past 4 decades, mainly in the low country of South Carolina. And I'm just starting this research, so it is pretty suggestive so far, but I'll tell you what it suggests. This is my a broad overview of my dissertation. I'm studying these two. There was a significant change in agriculture in the region around the turn of the century. So in the late 20th century, the Low Country was a global producer of tomatoes. So we see here on the left-hand side that USDA was really important in the region. This is the USDA Vegetable Lab. These are large monocrop fields of tomatoes that were grown for the global market. This is your sort of traditional capitalist large-scale agriculture. Then in the 90s, that tanked in a really dramatic fashion, and we see the growth of local food systems, a lot of small-scale, diversified, organic, farm-to-table, this kind of thing. And instead of the USDA, conservation NGOs have been really important in this transition. So I'm interested in understanding the reasons for that and also the implications of that change, specifically around land tenure and land use, but I'll get into that later. Okay, so the Soil Survey is a massive project and document. It's 82 pages of text and a whole bunch of maps that are derived from aerial photos. As you see here is a cooperative project from Soil Conservation Service, Forest Service, and some folks from the Clemson Ag Experiment Station there in the Low Country. It involved over 10 years of field work, right, to put this massive project together. And we see here, this is a photo of one of the massive fields there in the Low Country, which probably is a suburb now. I should probably follow up on that before I say that, but that has been the trend. There's been lots of, as tomato agriculture died, there's been a lot of development. Okay, so my questions about this survey: why was it undertaken? What kinds of assumptions inform the survey? Who had and continues to have access to the knowledge, if it's used anymore at all? To what ends has it been used? And this is a really important one, I think. How does it relate to its historical context, right? So how does it relate to the growth of the tomato industry, development issues in the region, and the civil rights and labor struggles, which were really peaking in 1970? And there's lots, I can get into it later. There's lots of other things, important things going on at the time. And then finally, so in what ways has this survey, or this knowledge produced by the survey, contributed to the current shape of the Low Country landscape? So my methods involve mainly, this is where I'm starting right now, interviews with extension agents, past and present, soil scientists in the region, local development experts, and farmers. And so far, this has kind of confirmed my initial, sort of skepticism or critical assumption that the soil survey was likely undertaken specifically to provide knowledge to large tomato growers about the best places to expand, right? And I can tell you why I think that's the case later, but my main assumption was kind of validated when the guy told me that, or one of the soil scientists told me that the state soil scientist makes the decision about when these new surveys are done. So it's not like every county was doing them in the late 1960s or whatever. They're done on a county by county basis, and there's actually a lot of connection between a lot of the local agricultural elites and the soil science and soil conservation folks that I've found in the archives. So anyway, that's kind of my initial hypothesis. Then I want to ask questions about land use and land tenure. For instance, does the tomato landscape expand and or centralize after this 1971 survey? You can get some of that from census data, but you can't get a sort of spatial analysis from the census data because it gives you sort of raw numbers. And then finally, I will be reading the document, this 82-page text, and the maps for what I'm thinking of as the politics of knowledge, which is basically how does this way of understanding and representing the soil and the place, how does that in turn create or shape that soil and that place? So a few examples of that. It's a kind of abstract idea if you're not familiar with the literature, but a few examples, I'll try to ground it in the survey. The survey ends with, it's a very quantitative, sort of purporting to be objective scientific document, but it ends with the history of crop production in the region, right, which is a total change in tone from the rest of the whole document. But these are just some crops I took out of that section. Their history of crop production. The first colonists settled in 1670. There were the French Huguenots and the English. Then rice culture was begun. It doesn't talk about, right, who was involved in rice culture, namely slaves, right, who also came from Africa. These are all white people mentioned here, basically, is what I'm going to get at. And we see that that trend follows until the current day. So my question then is, how did this way of knowledge, this way of representing and understanding the place, the history of agriculture, and the relation between humans and soil, how does this representation of the history affect the future of the region? So I'll end with some thanks to my committee and CICR and some funders, and that's it. Thanks.